Hi, and welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to finish up our discussion on personality with some discussion of the social cognitive theories and trait theories of personality. So again, we're going to focus on the last two-thirds of this, the social cognitive theories, self-concept, I forgot humanistic theories we're going to talk about today, and trait theories, and then we're not going to do 27 or 0.7, 8, or 9. So taking a look at personality through a behaviorist point of view, what a behaviorist is someone who uses the principles of conditioning, which we've talked about thus far, to explain the actions and reactions of humans and animals. And then those actions and reactions are what would form a person or animal's personality and temperament. Social cognitive theorists are a type of behaviorist or learning theorist who would emphasize the influence of social and environmental influences on personality, cognitive and problem solving, and thoughtful strategies on learning, which therefore reflects a person's personality. A strict behaviorist would say that a personality is no more than just the habits that we have formed over a lifetime. And a habit, in psychology terms, is a set of learned responses through conditioning. Albert Bandura, we've talked about him before with the Bobo-Doll experiment. His view in social cognitive is that it's not just governed by external stimuli and response patterns, like a true behaviorist would say, but it's also governed by cognitive processes inside the person, such as anticipating, judging, and memory, as well as learning through the imitation of models or looking at how other people react to situations. So his theory is known as reciprocal determinism. And reciprocal determinism, it's how Bandura basically says three things will influence how a person's personality develops: the factors of the environment, the person's personal characteristics, and behavior can influence and interact together to determine future behavior. Environment in this instance includes the physical surroundings, other people who may or may not be present, as we'll see in the next situation, and the potential for reinforcement that exists in these surroundings. And so the intensity and frequency of the behavior that is going to happen in the future is not only influenced by the environment, but also has an impact on that environment. It's kind of a symbiotic relationship. And if I'm getting too deep for you here, let's just take this hypothetical situation. So there's a student named Richard, and he walks into a classroom with other students, but there's no teacher present. So that sets the environment. The students are present, teacher is not present. Richard's personal characteristics include his desire to talk loudly and tell jokes when the teacher is not present, and that has been rewarding to him in the past because the students have laughed, and these past reinforcements are part of his cognitive processes and are expectancies of future reward for this behavior or being reinforced. If he keeps doing it, students will laugh. He knows he gets more attention when an authority figure is not present, so he begins the behavior of telling jokes and talking loudly, and that behavior will continue if he is reinforced for it. If anything in this situation changes, like if the teacher walks in, that changes the environment. If other students don't laugh at his jokes, that means he's not getting reinforcement. His behavior at this point will change. And so Bandura also, in the social cognitive theory, believes in something called self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is an individual's expectancy of how they will do or how much they will accomplish in any particular circumstance. How effective are they going to be in accomplishing a goal? And don't get this confused with self-esteem. Self-esteem is the values that a person places on his or her sense of worth. Are they correlated? More than likely, but they're not necessarily the same thing. A sense of self-efficacy can be high or low depending on what has happened in the past. People who are high in self-efficacy are more persistent and expect to succeed because they believe in themselves that they will accomplish a goal in any particular circumstance. Rotter is also a He's a social learning theorist, and this is a little bit different from social cognitive theory, but it does have some similarities. Rotter views personality as a relatively stable set of potential responses to various situations, and one of his theories is called the locus of control. Now, I love this because a lot of students don't even realize until they're taught right now that they do probably have more control than they believe. It's the tendency for people to assume that they either have control or do not have control over the events and consequences in their lives. People who have an internal locus of control assume that their own actions and decisions directly affect the consequences of the situation. And this internal locus of control, people who have this are associated with high achievement motivation. These are very, very good individuals who just have a sense that they control their own destiny. And people with an external locus of control are people who assume that their lives are decided and controlled by more powerful humans, luck, or even fate. And these people are more prone to learned helplessness and depression, both of which we have already discussed. Two key factors in broader social learning theory is what's going to influence a person's decision to act in a particular situation in a certain way are expectancy and reinforcement value. Expectancy is the subjective feeling that a person gets that a particular behavior will lead to a reinforcing consequence. And this is kind of similar to Bandura's self-efficacy. So if you want to draw arrows between there, you most certainly can. Reinforcement value refers to the individual's preference for a particular reinforcer over all other possible reinforcing consequences. So basically, think of it as a reward. Is the person going to get what they want? Is that going to be rewarding to them? Or is the reinforcement value not enough for them to do that behavior again in the future? Now let's move on to the humanistic perspective. And the humanistic perspective is born out of the pessimism of the psychodynamic theory and all the emphasis on sexual interactions and sexual nature behind our behavior, and basically the importance of childhood experiences and the lack of control that a person has. And lack of control of behaviorism, meaning you have no free will and you are just the result of a whole bunch of, what do we want to say? You are the result of your experiences throughout life. This theory is called the third force of psychology, and it's the humanistic perspective. The two most famous humanists are Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. They focus on things that make people uniquely human, like the subjective emotions we feel and the free will to choose our own path in life. Humans are always striving to fulfill their innate capacities to reach our full potential. And what this is called in humanism is self-actualizing tendency. People are self-actualizing all the time. It assumes that human nature is primarily good and that we are just trying to fulfill our capacities and capabilities. A person's self-concept is the image of oneself. It's based on what others tell you. It's how the sense of self is reflected in the words and actions of important peoples in one's life. So your parents, siblings, friends, coworkers, teachers, religious people, they all tell you certain things about yourself, and that helps to develop your self-concept. In humanistic theory, we have the ideas of the real self and the ideal self. The real self is your own perception of what you are, your characteristics, your traits, abilities that form your basis, basically your starting point on how you're going to strive to achieve self-actualization. Your ideal self is the perception of what you should be or would like to be in life. And now there's two basic things here. I'm going to flip the page, but keep talking if you want to come back and write this down. See these two charts. On the top chart, or in the top figure, the sort of Venn diagram looking thing, the ideal self and the real self mesh very well. They match and they are in harmony. That's what we call congruence. Their incongruence, the person is very happy. At the bottom, they don't match up very well. The ideal self is not the real self, and that creates anxiety or even anxiety disorders, neuroses about the person, and they are incongruent with one another. So when the real self and ideal self mesh well, they're said to be incongruents. When there is a mismatch between the real self and the ideal self, it's said to be incongruent, which can cause anxiety and neurotic behavior. In humanism, we talk about positive regard, which is the warmth, affection, and love that come from significant others in a person's life. It's vital to people's ability to cope with stress and to achieve this self-actualization. Now, there's two different types of positive regard. There's unconditional positive regard. That is when positive regard is given without conditions or strings attached. You are loved no matter what. You are respected no matter what. And then conditional positive regard is only positive regard given when the person is doing what the providers of the positive regard wish. So it's only when you act in certain ways is when you are given positive regard. So people who are given unconditional positive regard are much more balanced and happy than people who are given just conditional positive regard. So Carl Rogers' view on positive regard is that people are fully functioning people. They are in the middle of becoming self-actualizing. They're striving to reach their full potential while actively exploring other possible potentials and abilities and trying to gain a match between the real and ideal self. These people need unconditional positive regard. First off, this was developed, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and now our current views on the humanistic perspective is that the picture is a little bit too rosy and unpredictable and unrealistic. It's very difficult to test scientifically, but it does have a connection to the positive psychology movement, and that has helped out a lot of different therapies and helped out a lot of different people struggling with different things in their life. So does it have positive impact? Yes, it does, but there are still some things that are wrong with it. Finally, we have trait theory, and trait theories are basically connected with describing how a person is right now. It describes our personality based on a person's traits. And what is a trait? It's a consistent, enduring way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. Early trait theories, Gordon Allport and his lab assistant went through the dictionary and came up with 18,000 different traits that a person could have. And then they whittled their list down to about 200 after getting rid of synonyms. And he believes these traits are tied to a person's nervous system. There's no scientific proof for this theory, although current research has found some evidence for the heritability of traits. And Cattell he's another researcher, he categorizes traits into what are called surface traits and source traits. And he reduces the number of traits to between 16 and 23 basic traits. He has his own test, an assessment questionnaire called the 16 personality factor, which is based on 16 of those traits. And surface traits basically are the personality characteristics that can easily be seen by other people. And source traits are the more basic traits that underlie the surface traits. And people tend to basically they're more central to a person's human nature. So if someone is shy, quiet, dislikes crowds, that can be connected to, well, maybe they are an introvert. And we're going to be talking about introversion versus extraversion, but an introvert is the dimension of personality in which people tend to withdraw from excessive stimulation. It's just too much for them, and we'll get into that later. Other trait theorists have whittled it down to 5. There are basically 5 very important trait dimensions that every person has. And these dimensions can be remembered with the acronym OCEAN. They're not interdependent, which means that there's a tremendous amount of variety on these on these lines that these things lie, and there's a tremendous amount of variety and personality that can happen in the 5-factor model. The first one is openness, which is the willingness to try new things and be open to new experiences. You're on somewhere on that continuum. You either like it, you don't, or you're somewhere in the middle. Conscientiousness is the care a person gives to the organization and thoughtfulness of others and whether or not they're dependable. Extraversion is one's need to be with other people. So extroverts are people who are normally outgoing and sociable, and they like being around other people. Introverts prefer solitude and dislike being the center of attention. Agreeableness is the emotional style that a person may range from easygoing and friendly to grumpy, crabby, and unpleasant. And neuroticism is the degree of emotional instability or stability. Do they like to flip back and forth between emotions, or are they pretty stable, pretty even keel? Here's another table for you to put down or screenshot if you would like. Trait theories today. There's a lot of support for the 5-factor model across cultures that have been researched, and these personality traits are found in a number of different cultures. And there's another theory in trait theory today that's called trait-situation interaction, which is the assumption that certain situations influence how a trait is expressed. For example, I would consider myself a big introvert, but when I'm at school, the situation does not allow me to do that, so my introvert trait is not really expressed very well. So that's just kind of a small example of the trait-situation interaction. That's all I have for you today, I believe. Yep. So go ahead and fill out those learning targets, bring them back to class, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.